he was just a happy-go-lucky little 18-month-old. The babysitter then left Rex by the pool, and when she came back out, he was floating in the pool and said, "Your mom's on the phone. You need to talk to her." She said, "Hon, Rex is gone."
This is the Lost Child Podcast, where we delve into the topic of losing a child. These are real stories from real people sharing some of their darkest moments with us and their journey from that fateful experience. If you're grieving, I hope that you find hope and healing in these stories and you can relate to some of them. If you're supporting someone that's grieving, hopefully you can gain insight into what they're thinking and feeling. As a reminder, our guests are sharing some of their most guarded and precious spiritual and emotional experiences with us. Please keep that in mind when making comments on the video or the podcast. We have a guest with us here today, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his story. Let's dive into the podcast.
Well, thank you, John, for being here with us in this room, and Colleen for also coming. Just to get started, to jump right in, can you tell us your son's name?
My son was, his full name was James Rexford Harrington. And Rex was my grandfather's name, my favorite grandfather.
Wow.
So I he's my grandfather's namesake. Mm-hmm. But he went by, we called him Rex.
You called him Rex?
Yeah.
After your grandfather?
Yes.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah. He was a James Rexford also, and passed away many years ago. But and I'm John Jr., and my dad did not want me called Junior. So I basically went by a nickname, Buzz, for growing up in high school. But he didn't want me naming my first son John L. Harrington III.
Yeah.
So I went to my next best option, and that was my grandfather.
Wow.
It's a good option.
And was he your first kid, your only kid?
He was my second.
Okay.
And he had an older sister that was actually at the house the day that he passed away. And she's 3 years older than him.
3 years. Okay.
Wow.
So just the two kids.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about Rex? What was he like?
Well, he passed away on the day of his 18-month birthday.
Oh,
So
wow.
he was only a year and a half when he passed away. So he was just getting to the point where he was, fun to interact with. And one of my favorite things, I used to lay on the couch to watch TV and sometimes take a nap. But he would come over and just throw himself on top of my
Just
chest.
lay on your belly. Yeah.
And one of the first words he learned how to say was "Daddy." So he'd do that, and we could tell he was going to be a very special kid. He just was smart and interactive.
Was he already walking at that point then too, and doing stuff like that?
Yeah, he was walking, and I know we had him in a little preschool next to our house, and that was good interaction. We always got great reports that he was a sociable kid and really wanted to interact with the other children.
And was that here in Arizona?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, he was born in 84.
Okay.
And I had moved here in 79, gotten married, and then he came in 84.
Wow.
Awesome.
Do you have a favorite memory? I realize it was only 18 months that you got to be with him, but do you have one favorite memory or a couple favorite memories of spending time with him?
The times we cuddled on the couch when he would come over and just throw his arms around me were really special. And I remember those vividly. So he wasn't at the age where he was doing
A whole lot.
not running for president or anything.
Yeah.
But he was just a happy-go-lucky little 18-month-old, and so I didn't have a chance to get too many memories with him.
Yeah. And from a dad standpoint, right there, that 18-month range is when, from my experience, you have a lot of bonding from that point going forward, because it's finally where they can start to interact and they can point and say, I want this or whatever. You start playing with cars and doing all of those things with them, versus that first 18 months was really mom was taking care of most of their needs and what they were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He cried and pooped like every other baby. So, so he was just becoming fun.
Yeah.
And then he was gone, and it was tough to go into his room and see the bed and that type of thing.
Can you tell us a little bit about the accident and what happened with Rex?
Sure. He was in the care of a babysitter. My wife was working, and I was out of town, and he was in the care of this babysitter that had all the certifications and everything. That we were pretty diligent about that. And my daughter, who was a little bit older than Rex, the story we have anyway, is that she was hungry and wanted to get a sandwich or something in the house, and the babysitter took her inside and left Rex by the pool. And when she came back out, he was floating in the pool. And
were they already playing in the pool or playing around the pool? Or?
Around the pool.
Okay.
They were playing around. They weren't swimming. But apparently, even with her training, she started screaming and basically freaked out. A neighbor heard the screaming and came through our side gate and got Rex out of the pool and started CPR on him. And it wasn't long thereafter that the medics showed up. And I think they were breathing for him with a little ventilator bag, and got him down to Good Sam, and that's where they pronounced him dead. So I was up in Sedona actually, and got a friend. My mother called a buddy of mine I was up there with, and so it was quite a shock.
And how did that go? Your buddy, did he get the full information, or did he get something like, hey, you just need to call your mom, or you need to call your wife, or how was the message relayed to you?
Somehow she got through. We were at a place for a post-race party, and somehow she got through, and he was actually on the phone with her when he came and got me and said, your mom's on the phone, you need to talk to her. And she was at our house, and she said, hon, Rex is gone.
I'm so sorry.
That's the hard part to relive. So I was kind enough. I worked for Good Sam at the time.
Was it just pure shock right there?
Oh.
In that moment, you were just...
Couldn't believe it.
Oh, yeah. It was quite a shock. I kind of dropped to my knees. My buddy took the phone and said, we'll get him home, don't worry. And I was fortunate enough, we had enough contacts in the medical community that the sheriff's department took me down to Cottonwood, and my boss at Good Sam sent a helicopter to bring me down to Good Sam. So,
because you were working at Good Sam at the time too. Mm-hmm. So he was taken to the hospital that you were working at.
Yeah, I was working there, and a bunch of very kind people, and literally they took me under the wing and tried to help me deal with what was going on.
Where was your wife at during all this, since your mom's the one that called you?
Yeah, she was, she sold Mary Kay. I don't know if you're familiar with that,
Yeah.
cosmetics and that kind of thing. And she was at a group meeting for her Mary Kay buddies. And so she went home because we started having people that came over and wanted to express sympathy and that type of thing. But my mom was the first one there.
Okay.
Kind of beat her home. So they wanted to make sure they got in touch with me as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah.
And then from there, in the helicopter ride, did you find out that Rex was already dead, or did you get to the hospital and then find out that he was dead?
No, I'm not sure of the timing of everything, but my mom had basically told me he's gone.
Oh, okay.
So I knew I was going to the hospital. I knew I was going to get to hold him one last time. Mm-hmm. And my dad was there, and my boss at the time from Good Sam was there, and met me on the helipad and took me down, and then it gets kind of blurry. I have to start doing the plans and making decisions about burial and that type of thing.
So what were your emotions and feelings right afterwards? Do you feel like you could really have emotions? Did you feel numb or?
Yeah, I think shock would be a good way to express it. We had to get so many things done in a short period of time because we buried him back in Pennsylvania, where we're originally from.
Oh, okay.
So we had a service here that was standing room only. I mean, I think the whole hospital came.
Yeah.
And then, so we had to get him prepared and ship him to I think we flew into Pittsburgh. And he's buried a little bit north of Pittsburgh.
And you still had family out there at the time? Okay.
Yep. By Erie, a little town called Warren, Pennsylvania is our hometown. And still have some cousins and sister and niece and nephew that still live in Warren. So we go back every other year or so.
Okay.
See family.
You can bring the mic a little bit closer. That's good. Yeah. Is he buried next to family?
Yes, he's buried next to his grandfather.
He's buried next to Rex.
Yep.
Oh, that's special.
That's special.
Yep. Rex and his first wife, who I never really knew, and then we have some other relatives buried in the same cemetery.
Will you be buried there too?
No. we have a niche here at Holy Redeemer Cemetery up on Pinnacle Peak Road.
Okay.
Nice.
So we're doing the cremation thing, and we'll both be in the same niche. So, but Rex is with family in Hermitage.
Good.
You may have heard of Hermitage Cemetery. Do you remember the hostage crisis in Iran? That had to be early 80s. But they held a bunch of Americans hostage in Iran. And so everybody back here was counting the days. And every day, this cemetery would put up another American flag along the driveway that went into the cemetery. So by the end, they had, probably 50 or 60 flags for the days that went by with the hostages. And so all of that was still up when we took Rex back and
Wow.
Had a little service at the gravesite, and that was that. But I'm comforted by the fact that he's buried next to his grandfather.
Yeah.
Did your daughter really understand what was going on at the time? Because she was, like 4 years old or something?
She was 3.
Or 3, okay.
And I don't think so at the time. And she lives in Cave Creek and manages a Fry's bakery.
Oh, cool.
But she, over the years, kind of the lasting thing that always sticks with me, she saw the medics turn him over and
Try to help
to get him to throw up. And to this day, and she's 40-something now, to this day, if somebody looks like they're going to throw up, she has to leave.
Oh, wow.
And she doesn't fully understand that, but I think I do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Other than that, she doesn't really have vivid memories of that day.
Okay.
Here's also a reminder to subscribe and follow this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. Now, back to the podcast.
One memory or one thought I just keep coming to me is that I don't think anyone in your situation is prepared for. No one in our situation was prepared for, because every time you go to a funeral, the casket's like a full-size casket, because it's typically just, if you were to take it how it's supposed to be, you get old and you end up dying. That's just the process that we all take, right?
Yeah.
But it's a fully developed, normal-sized human, right? And so the casket's big, and then when you have a child that dies, you're now trying to get this small casket, and it's this awful thing that you never thought you'd ever have to even make a decision on something like that.
Nope.
And now you have to. You're forced to.
We went to, I don't even know if it's still there, Messengers on Bethany Home Road. And they were so kind and went out of their way to make sure we had everything we needed. And they actually picked out the casket, which was a child-sized casket.
Yeah.
So that was nice and helped with all the arrangements about getting him back to Pennsylvania. So those people are worth their weight in gold.
We had a custom casket built for Sonny.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. It was pink and purple, and it had sparkles all over it.
Yeah.
That's so sweet.
When we walked in to see it the first time after it had been made, I was very nervous that I was just going to hate it, because why would you like a casket that size, you know? And I think the only thing I could say to Camille through tears was, it's perfect. It's exactly, if you were in a casket store and Sonny was next to us, that's the one she would have picked. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
You do remember those things.
Some things that people have talked about from a psychological standpoint is the stages of grief that people can potentially go through. Things like anger, bargaining, acceptance, and denial.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's one more,
Depression.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily, people say stages and everyone always thinks it's almost steps. You go through the 5 steps and all of a sudden you're fine. It's not that. It's a cycle that you can continually go through, and even 40 years removed from the situation, you can still be going through some of those. Are there any of those aspects of those specific ones that you've actually seen in your life?
Probably the one I remember most is anger.
Yeah.
And I guess there was nobody to be angry at except God. And I almost,
A question I think everyone would have, and I have personally, is did you ever get angry at the babysitter?
I did not. I never had any conversation with her after that day, and then they moved away shortly thereafter.
Oh, wow.
But my first wife had a conversation over the fence with her one day.
Oh, did she live right by you guys?
Right behind us.
Oh,
I mean, we
okay.
looked in their backyard over our fence.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she had a conversation with her in tears and forgave her.
Yeah.
So we never heard from her again. They moved somewhere, and I'm sure to escape some of the trauma that they experienced.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
There's someone else that we know off the top of my head that had a baby, I think, choked to death while she was watching her.
Yeah.
I can't even fathom that. Like, I can't even I know what it's like from a parent standpoint to lose a child, but
Yeah.
in that realm of her, I don't know how it would have been for her, but it's amazing you guys were able to forgive her. I hope that she was able to take that and forgive herself and forgive the situation, forgive everything.
Yeah.
Right? But you did talk about being angry at God.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit about that and how you've either worked through that, or if you're still angry at God, or kind of where you're at on that whole thing?
Yeah, I'm not. Not still angry, but there was a long time I just didn't understand why he could do something to us. I mean, we were born and raised Catholic and had a very good relationship with our church in Moon Valley. And he, of course, didn't realize we were taking him to church every Sunday, but he was there. So, and I don't really know how I dealt with my anger. It was kind of the passage of time, and we got real active in our church. And
Right afterwards, or?
soon thereafter.
Were you ever angry enough that you didn't want to pray anymore?
Yes. Yeah. It was like, how, why,
Yeah.
and why me, or why us? So, yeah, I was pretty angry, and had a couple conversations with our pastor at St. Paul's, and he's very kind. Didn't fully grasp, how I was feeling and where I was coming from and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But through our activities in the church, we we taught marriage class. We did, what else did we do?
You can talk. Yeah.
Well, so you're now about 2 years after Rex has passed.
Okay.
So he's speaking, I think initially his first year or so was a lot of his inner turmoil. And then we married 2.5 years later.
Okay.
And then we just been very, very active in our church. You know.
That's one thing everybody told me after Rex was gone, that pay attention to your marriage because you're going to grieve differently, and sometimes that's just doesn't work out.
Yeah.
And
There's potential to create a wedge.
yes, yep. Because there's blame that goes on and guilt, and it's pretty difficult to deal with, especially when you're talking about two different people.
Yeah.
And we ended up getting separated.
Would you say that before Rex died, you guys had a pretty solid relationship or marriage, or what would you say about your relationship before?
It wasn't the best marriage.
Okay.
We had a few verbal encounters before Rex died, and she kind of viewed this as us getting back together now. We have something in common to deal with, and we have to do that together. And she never said it out loud, but I felt she was angry at me,
Yeah.
and it just wasn't going to work.
Why would she be angry at you?
I'm not really sure that I wasn't there.
Yeah, you weren't there.
I think some of it, just if from a fly on the wall, would be similar to the grief cycle. Anger is part of that,
Yeah,
and sometimes you have to direct that at somebody,
yeah,
right?
Right.
And if you don't direct it at God, you have to direct it at something or someone. And if you don't direct it at the actual situation, I'm just angry with the situation, then oftentimes you can direct it at a person.
yeah.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
I get
like,
that.
It's possible, but so that's interesting. Selfishly, again, going back to the anger with God, the reason why I want more clarity on this.
Sure.
Selfishly, that's something that I really am trying to work through, because it begs the question, why? You were active in your Catholic faith. You were going to church. You were trying to do the things you were trying to do. You're trying to be a good father. You're trying to provide for your family. You're doing these things, but yet this tragic thing still happened to you.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile with that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. One of my colleagues at work gave me a book called "Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People?"
Yeah.
And that was probably the first and only book I read about dealing with my grief. But I remember it being very helpful and giving me some tools to deal with it.
Did you see any of the other stages or cycles in the grief cycle, like bargaining? And that one's going to be, God, if I would have been home that day, if I wouldn't have been in Sedona, if I wouldn't have done this, I could have changed the outcome.
Yeah.
What could I have done to change it?
Yeah, I don't remember directly. I'm sure I was depressed in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time crying, spent a lot of time by myself. My dad was a psychiatrist, so I kind of got therapy from him.
Did you want it? Or was he kind of like, I'm just going to tell you these things? Or did you actually seek out help from him?
Well, we saw them all the time. We were
Yeah.
very, very active together as a family, and they were just there for us.
Yeah.
So by nature, he's a very kind man, and he you could recognize what I was going through, and probably having dealt with it with hundreds of patients, he was very helpful.
Wow.
What other things did you use? Other tools? You read that book. You talked with your dad. You
Yeah.
did mention earlier that you talked with your pastor, but he didn't really seem to understand.
Yeah, that's kind of one of my beefs with the Catholic faith. We have priests who are good people.
Yeah.
And but they don't have the life experience that people in family situations have. So,
You exercise like
oh,
he was a triathlete.
I got, yeah,
And yeah.
I did deal with it with getting out on the road on my bike or running and that type of thing. And I think that helped quite a bit too.
Exercise.
Yeah,
Yeah. I've heard that from multiple people. That exercise is really helpful.
yeah, gives you an outlet.
Yeah, also the grief counselor that we met with right after talked about, I think it was kinetic therapy. I can't remember the terminology she used, but it was about rhythm and actually movement. And so I think it was, I think that's what it was. But essentially, I don't remember what it was, but essentially it was getting out on a bike, getting out on a hike or a run, a swim, doing these things. And then it's a lot of what I've done too. And that was the way that I would actually process and go through the accident that happened with us, is while I was riding my bike. Because it would let me be alone in my thoughts while I was doing kind of a monotonous task of just pedaling. But then my mind is just going off on everything that I'm thinking, feeling. Yeah.
I certainly empathize with that. And I think that was helpful for me. You know, it didn't help the relationship with my wife or her grieving process, but she wasn't an athlete and didn't have the same outlets that I had.
Did you ever consider like going on a medication or like
No.
group therapies or anything like that?
No, they directed me to a group, I guess, counseling session that all the parents there had lost children. And I went a couple times, but it made me feel worse. I was sitting there listening to everybody else's tragedies. And
Why did it make you feel worse? Was it you felt bad for them for their situation, or did it compound and make you feel bad?
Kind of
For your
reliving
own-
your situation.
both,
Yeah,
both of
both
those things. It's like, you know, it'd be person after person giving me the details of what happened to them. And I, of course, could chime in whenever I wanted to. But I guess it was, I just didn't want to hear it. And it did take me back to what had happened. And I found that, you know, just praying and being in my own head was the best way for me to deal with it.
So ultimately, did you get over your anger towards God because you turned to prayer and confided in Him?
Good question. I can't tell you for sure. Over time, I lost that anger.
Do you know
It's a lot of
time-
effort and energy
Yeah.
to be angry at something.
Yeah,
So you're just like, I can't do it anymore.
yeah.
Do you know a timeline of maybe how long it took you?
I don't know. Was I better by the time we got married?
Well, you were, and then we did we blended our families, and then he became so focused on our unit and more active in the church, and then he became, involved in the choir, and kind of just really threw all of his energy then into our two children, and I brought a son to our marriage, who was 7 months younger than Rex, little toe-headed, exactly like Rex, and he just consumed his love. I mean, his love for then our nucleus was amazing. And then he started involved with the Drowning Coalition. So his energy went from angry for about a year or so to then wanting to help anybody and be involved, and started the Drowning Coalition.
Yeah, my goal was to make something positive, if you can think in those
that's good.
terms, make something positive happen out of the tragedy and help keep other parents from having to experience it too. So that was an outlet. And you reminded me, I was active. I played trumpet and active with my church choir, playing trumpet. And that took a lot of work to get back in shape, but it focused my attention on something, and I wasn't thinking about Rex 24/7. I had a little break time mentally.
So the drowning.
Pause 1 second. I'm just going to move that microphone over, and I'm going to have you be able to say
No,
some stuff.
it's not about. No, it's not at all.
You have good stuff to say. So here we go.
Oh, sure. You wanted that microphone.
But I just see how remarkable you have been.
Yeah.
Yes, initially. A terrible loss, and then just put all of his energy into now our family.
Yeah.
It's just been, remarkable. And 38 years ago when this happened, and for the first 15 years, easily he would make PSAs, or we'd come home from Mass and a TV crew would be in front of our home because a child had drowned earlier that day. And he would relive and be interviewed.
Wow. Okay.
And he just did this anytime anybody phoned him, a news crew, he was there for them. And, like today, he just didn't hesitate to want to be involved with you and share his story and just.
So the Drowning Coalition, how long after Rex's passing did you start that up?
I think it was about 2 years. A guy came and knocked on my door at my house and said he was from the Consumer Product Safety Commission. And he said, I'm not here to point any fingers or do blame, but we're working on how do we make pools safer for kids and how do we keep them out of the pool when they get curious. He said there's a group meeting down at Maricopa County Medical Center that's firefighters, health professionals, parents, and they're trying to figure out what to do because that was a summer we had, I think in June, we had like 30 incidents in backyard pools.
Oh, wow.
So I went to a meeting, got to know some people, and with my business background, I said, well, let's formalize this thing. And so we got an attorney and drafted articles of incorporation and bylaws and submitted it all to the Corporation Commission and became 1989, we became an official 501c3 organization. And back then, there wasn't any barrier codes. There wasn't, the visibility that you see today. But that was one of our first missions, was to make it visible and provide education to people, especially new parents. So it was pretty much focused on kids getting into backyard pools. And over time, I was president of the organization for 17 years. Finally, somebody said, John, you've done enough. I'm interested to take your place if you want to do that. So I've had a nice succession of very concerned and empathetic people. And
so that 501c continues today?
It does. It does. It's, since 89, so 30 plus years.
35 years.
Yeah.
I was born in 89.
Hey, Lost Child podcast family, I have something special for you right now. Following the death of Sonny, I had a book that was gifted to me. This book right here, Like a River. I think this book is an incredible book. It's an incredible read for somebody that's going through grief or loss, specifically about losing a child. Granger Smith goes into great detail about his experience losing their son, River. Now, I have set up an affiliate link down in the video description or podcast description. By purchasing this book through the link we give you, the Lost Child podcast will receive a small commission, which will help support the podcast to help more people with hope and healing through their grief journeys. Thank you for your support of the Lost Child podcast. Now, back to the podcast.
Well, you've probably seen Dave Muncie, the old weatherman from Channel 10, who was very active with us. He ended all of his newscasts, or his weathercasts, with "Watch your kids around water." And didn't matter what he was reporting on, he always ended his newscast with that. Wow. And he still is available to us. They kind of put me in an emeritus status, and they hit me up when they need a voice or need advice on direction or something like that. But
do you think that helped you heal, creating this thing to try to make positivity out of this awful negative situation you had?
Oh, without question. Without question. If you look at the history, we have a physician that works for DHS that keep statistics. We put in place a mechanism for the fire departments when they respond to a water-related call. They have a sheet they fill out that documents as much information as they can get. And this physician puts it all together and provides an annual report. And if you look at, say, 89, 90, the statistics then compared to statistics today, they are dramatically better.
Wow.
And, as I could see that happening, it was like we are doing something positive here. We're making a difference.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it did help me quite a bit.
Did they have fences around pools back then?
No.
So that kind of probably helped get that going.
Did you
and
guys
stuff.
advocate for a bill or something to
Oh, yeah.
make that law in effect?
Yeah, it was an interesting experience going through that. We went to the state health department, and I testified in front of a hearing about what happened and what did we have to do to help prevent it. And one of the legislators looked at me and said, "Well, you're just a bad parent." I said, "Excuse me?"
That's
"Well, you're a bad
terrible.
parent." I said, "I grew up on a farm with a pond. We never had any problems there."
Yeah.
And I was like, well, there's only so far you can take
Yeah.
people that don't want to help.
Yeah.
So then we started, there was a fire chief that he and I teamed up, and we started going to city council meetings in the various cities. And that's where the movement for barrier codes came into existence. Phoenix was one of the first ones.
Wow.
And they still have one of the toughest ones. So we focused a lot on barrier codes, providing education. The Phoenix Fire had a program called Just a Few Seconds. The message was, don't ever turn your back on a child near water.
Yeah.
And so we supported that and helped them out. And now just about every city, last I checked, except Goodyear, has a barrier code. So fence between your home and your pool. And they're all, the fire departments have been wonderful. They are very supportive and still to this day do programs. KTIR is involved. You probably heard some of their commercials. And like Channel 10, Channel 12 all stepped up and they're interested when something's happened and they have to report on it. But to get them, one of our, submissions was get them interested enough that they'll report on this when there's no tragedy.
Yeah.
And to some extent, we were successful with that. To some extent, the news is the news, and
Exactly.
they have to have something hot to report on it.
Yeah. They had us on the news just 2 weeks ago.
Well, did they?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Not me.
Yeah. We got reached out to right after the accident by multiple news
Oh, I'm
sources.
sure.
That was not something that I wanted to engage in. I took a break from. The other thing is I already do a bunch of social media stuff anyways. And I essentially took a break for a good 2 or 3 weeks. I didn't even get on anything because I was like, I can't do this right now.
Yeah.
But news stations, multiple ones had reached out. But then when we started this podcast, we actually had a news station, ABC 15 here in Phoenix, reach out and say, hey, we want to do a story on the fact that you're trying to do this positive thing based off this tragedy that happened to your family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once in a while, they'll report on it when there's no tragedy.
Yeah.
But it's tough to convince them
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
And just as a side note, I was talking to the president of the coalition, and she's aware of your story and said to offer you guys, if you would ever want to get involved, a spot on the board for the Drowning Prevention Coalition. And since my time, they've expanded to lakes and canals and anything that's a body of water. So you may maybe seen these being boating people, but the stands that are on the shore with life jackets.
Yep.
That we started that.
Oh, wow.
And got funding to buy the life jackets. And so we do interact with boating and lakes now. which was new for us.
That's really cool.
So I'll send you her information, and if you want to call her, great. If not, they're really good people. Most of them are, a lot of them are fire department people. So it's kind of their job to pay attention to public safety.
That'd be good. With Rex's accident, how did that change your outlook as a parent? Did it change your parenting style, or moving forward, how did that shift your actions?
Well, it made me much more aware of the hazards. I mean, it was really cool. We moved here from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And the coolest thing in the world was, hey, let's build a pool in the backyard.
Yeah.
So we did. But they didn't have anybody coming to us at that point in time saying, oh, yeah, you need to fence the pool.
Yeah.
Or put up some sort of barrier between the home and the pool. So we weren't really barraged, but they took pictures later of the pool, and actually it ended up in the Republic as almost a finger pointing. I didn't live in the house anymore, but finger pointing, saying, you know, look at these idiots. They had a kid drown in their backyard pool, and they still haven't put up a fence. So that was, excuse me, that was hard for my first wife to deal with.
Yeah.
Because I had her picture in the paper and everything, and
Oh my goodness.
she took a lot of.
Some people have to do that.
You mentioned the idiots on social
Yeah.
media that can be anonymous, and so they feel free to trash anything they want.
Yeah.
Luckily, we didn't have social media, or in some ways, luckily, we didn't have social media back then.
Yeah.
I'm also curious how Rex's death played into your guys' coming together and courting and dating and getting married, because I feel like there would be some level that it would either pull you together or something. Like there was something you could bond over. Maybe I'm wrong, but as
well,
No, I think it. The fun thing is, like I said, we all knew each other.
yeah,
So I had, like I mentioned, I'd left the church, and I was divorced. And then when Rex passed away, and we all worked at the same hospital, so then he and Chris separated and divorced, and we just blended a family. And you had asked how his parenting style had changed.
Yeah.
So Zach, the son I brought to our marriage, was younger than Rex, and he didn't swim. And it was the first thing he'd hold on to his kickboard as tight as he could. He'd jump off the diving board and hold on to his little kickboard. And John said then when we moved into our home, you know, first thing was a fence, and he said Zach needs to learn how to swim today, and he did, and I think also with Rex being so young when he passed, and then Zach being 3.5 when we married, it kind of to see Jennifer on one hip and Zach on another hip, and John reading stories. It was kind of like he hadn't been able to have that with Rex, and it kind of just solidified everything that we were enjoying and working towards, was having a stronger family bond. We remained very close friends with Jennifer's mom, with John's first wife. Fortunate to still have that interaction with her. She still lived in the same home until she had passed away. But she was involved in our family Easter and Christmas sort of thing, because she didn't have family here, and I still had my family here. So she was just always at our home, and soccer games and Girl Scout, outings and that sort of thing. So we were just really fortunate that we could all remain and be close and still have that time and that family, sense.
Yeah.
For the most part.
yeah,
It was just.
yeah, I think it made me a better parent, more aware of what's out there. I was pretty much focused on my career, but this kind of opened my eyes to, well, you got to pay attention here because these are your kids, and so I fully believe that it made me a better parent.
Kind of change your perspective on things too.
Way, Yeah, like 180 degrees.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why I asked that question is because I hope that people that listen to this can take our experiences and instead change without having to go through the awful experience that we went through. Right?
Amen. Yeah.
That they can see it. Oh wow. Oh wow. He was so career focused and so this focused that I don't like the word neglect, but that you almost brushed aside some of those fatherly or parental responsibilities. And all of a sudden you had a wake up of, oh my gosh, what's really important in life?
Yes.
Is my business and my career as important as I think it is? No. But my kids are way more important, and my wife is way more important than the emphasis I put on it before.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, and it does sound so cliche, you know, you never take anything for granted, and you don't. I mean, you don't anymore. You know, every day is just such a blessing, and you make that just the most awesome day you can. If you know,
Yeah.
you just don't take anything for granted anymore,
Yeah.
and just to be involved as much as you can. And he was such an excellent, an amazing like hospital administrator, and you know would still do that, of course, and give 100%. But then now our family was also just a huge part of his life.
One of the other families that we talked to, the husband used to even miss out on some of the family trips because he was working so much. But he had actually started to shift before their son ended up dying. He started to shift to try to be more involved. And then when their son died, it was another switch that it flipped. And he was like, no, I'm not missing stuff anymore. This is what's important.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty big switch.
Yeah, definitely.
Imagine as an NP in family practice, you'll have the ability to interact with young families.
Yeah.
And don't hesitate to tell your story.
Yeah. Well, just the other day at my rotations that I'm at right now, it's like a concierge medicine place, or they call it direct primary care. I was seeing a patient who I had known had lost a son like 2.5 years ago. And my preceptor was like, are you okay going in there by yourself? Or like, or do you even want to go in at all?
Right.
And I was like, yeah, I'll be fine. And so she was like, yeah, like I'm trying to decide if I should start on medications or not. And because for the most part, it sounds like she's okay. It's just, she gets in moments where, and I'm like, what? So anyways, I was like, I don't feel like you need to start on like anything that's every day because you're going to have those times. And I was like, I actually just lost a daughter 6 months ago. And my husband and I decided to start this podcast. And she's like, wait a second, like the Lost Child podcast or whatever. And I was just like, or something like that. I can't remember the exact story. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, Camille? And I was like, yeah. She's like, I'm listening to your podcast. So I was like, oh, well, that's cool. So like, it's good to know that people are spreading it and trying to get it to people that they feel like it could be useful to. So, and like I did, like in that moment that I was talking to her, even though like it's good, but I hate it at the same time. Like I had the feeling like, or like the thought come into my head, like this is why this had to happen to you. So that you could help these other people. So that you would understand what they feel like so that you could help them. I'm like, well, that's great, but I also don't like that at the same time.
But and that's something you have always said. If he could help one family, and again, 38 years ago, if he could just help one family or save one child.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you're probably impacting more people than you think you are.
It's really hard to see that too, though. I feel like, or even like people will tell me like, oh yeah, like it's great, whatever. I'm like, is it though? I still like question myself and like, have doubts like, is the podcast helping people? I don't know.
I assume you probably would have gone through the same type of stuff with the coalition that you started of like, especially in those first years in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Am I actually making a difference? And you might have friends or other people that would tell you, awesome, you're doing great. But in your mind, I would assume in your mind, you would say, are you just saying that because
you're my friend and you know me and you think I'm doing a good thing? Or is it because this is actually impactful?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's been interesting. We've had friends or acquaintances that have bought a new house and it has a pool, or they decide to put a pool in, and I become kind of their worst nightmare.
Because you're like, put in a fence.
Because
Yeah.
Yes.
and like our granddaughters, their other grandparents, they've had 2 different houses now, both with pools, and I said, unless you have a fence around that pool, we're not going to let the grandchildren come over and visit you.
Yeah.
And amazing, they put in a fence.
But even remember when we were up in Flagstaff and our daughter had like some of her friends and little children over to our home, using the backyard pool, and they had posted a picture of the girls and other little kids. They had propped open the fence with a chair, number one, no, and they were having bowl of ice cream on the other side of the fence, and we're just like, oh my God. And we didn't permit them to use our fence our pool anymore, without us being there.
Yeah.
We just thought, do you know what we've lived through, what John has lived through and gone through?
I think it's really hard for other people to understand. Like, they can empathize so much, but until they've actually experienced what you've experienced, and no one can ever experience what you've experienced because you're your own person. You have your own thoughts. You have your own experiences. So no one will ever be able to experience actually what you've experienced, even though they may have lost a kid to drowning.
Yeah.
Everyone goes through things differently.
And as a spouse, not having been Rex's mom, I don't even know what he's gone through. Even here we are, 38 years later. And so on a special day or a commercial or anything, and he'll be in his, chair, and I'll be sitting next to him, and he'll start to cry. And all I can do really is just give him a hug, because I don't know. Sometimes words, there are no words to say.
Exactly.
You just want to give him a hug and let him know that you love him. And, so I think that's
And that helps.
right.
And people want to make it all better. Mm-hmm. And the frank fact is you can't make it all better.
No.
There's not one thing you can say that can just remove all the pain, all the hurt.
Correct.
Right? You can give a hug. You can't, like, those things. I agree with you. It does help, but people want the magic bullet to take everything away.
Yeah.
And you can't.
Yeah, there is no magic bullet. And it's still, even though it's 38 years later, it's like today, but I just don't know when it's coming. And all of a sudden,
Right.
I'll be blubbering and don't know what triggered it or anything. But sometimes I do know, because every time there's a drowning story on the news, it just kind of hits me in the gut. And thinking, and I always look for the telltale signs. Well, the gate was propped open, or they didn't have a fence. And then I sick the coalition on them.
I was watching one of your podcasts whereby a mom had said, and maybe even you had said, Camille, people don't mention their names, the children's name. Or I initially, May 17th is when Rex passed away. So the morning of May 17th, of course, I remember. And it's kind of like I would kind of like tiptoe around, do I say today's Rex's anniversary?
Yeah.
Or today is Rex's birthday, he would be so and so, or I wonder what he would be doing today if he were. And we talk about him like he's still with us.
Yeah.
Because you never, he is, you know what I mean? You want to keep that memory alive, and it's very easy to do, even though he was only, with John for 18 months. Just to keep speaking about them, And a mom had said, I remember one of the gals had said, people stopped asking about her son, or were afraid to mention his name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
and I'm sure you'll have other opportunities to get in the public spotlight. And I hated it when I knew I was going to have to get on TV and talk about drowning prevention. but it gets easier over time. You kind of get your messages you want to get out in your 15 seconds on air.
Yeah.
And you get that honed down. And so the public part gets a little bit easier, but still, 38 years later, here I am.
How often would you say, some people have explained the grief sometimes hits you like a rogue wave? There's times that you're at the beach and there's just kind of like nice waves coming, and then all of a sudden there's this huge wave that comes out of nowhere. You had no anticipation of it. It knocks you over.
Yeah.
That's how some people explain and describe. I would think that you would assume the same thing. How often have those occurred in these last, let's say, just say 40 years to make it easy, but in these last 40 years, how often have those rogue waves occurred?
Well, and I think that's a great way to put it. In the early days, back in the 90s, maybe even in the 2000s, I would even have to pull my car off the road
Yeah.
so I could get it out and I wasn't going to hurt anybody. So these days it's I guess been long enough that I've learned how to deal with it, and so the wave doesn't come as often anymore.
Yeah.
When I have to tell the story of that day, it comes.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a key thing, I think, to me, and I think to everybody else listening, is it's been 40 years and there's still these rogue waves that come. And there's these times that you just remember. And the other thing that I think is important too is he was only 18 months old. It wasn't like you had 18 years of life with him. You had 18 months.
yeah.
And yet the tie to you is still so strong, and that emotional toll that it takes because of that nature of having a child get taken from you.
Yeah. I just given up the fact that it will always be part of me.
Yeah.
And I just turned 69 yesterday, so I'm thinking, hey, I got another 20 years to deal with this.
Well, now that it's been 40 years, is there anything you've learned in those 40 years that you wish you could go back to yourself right after it happened and say, do these things, this will help you get through some of this stuff?
Wow. Good question.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Because through the coalition, and especially in the 90s and the 80s, that kept me real busy because I had a real job too.
Yeah.
And getting the stuff done we got through the coalition, plus running the coalition, plus everything else we had to do, it really got me focused enough on something else, and I could see the good coming out of it. So I guess in some way, shape, or form, that really lessened whatever would make me get hit by the wave.
Yeah, because you're focused so much on other people and helping other people than just yourself and the sorrow that you feel and all that kind of stuff.
And some of the literature I've read have talked about a men's situation or a men's view of it, a father's view. And most fathers really need to pour all of their energy into something. And so for you, it was work, but also this benefit of, not a benefit, but trying to make a benefit out of this bad situation. And so you poured all of your energy into that. So you had the coalition, plus you had your work, and then coming from Colleen, she talked about pouring all of your effort into your family unit that you guys had, and all of your kids and things like that. So, yeah, that's some of the literature I've talked about, or I've read, have talked about from a male's perspective. One of the things that helps them the most is to find something to just put all of your energy into and do.
Yeah.
You can call it maybe a distraction, but I don't know if it's necessarily a distraction because it gives you an opportunity to process and it gives you purpose in doing some of those things.
And we could see the results too.
Yeah.
And when you can see the results, hard, cold data, it's like, we work hard, but it's having an impact.
Yeah.
So I'm sure in some way, shape, it has been good for me internally to see that happen.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you guys for coming on the podcast and
sure.
sharing your story.
Thanks for the invitation.
Coming here.
Thanks for joining us on the Lost Child podcast. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. And remember, shine bright, and we'll see you in the next episode.